I thought I'd talk today about the book I've published most recently. For most of my career as a picture maker and a author, I've been pretty much focused on fantasies, and I can't account for exactly why that was the genre that attracted me as a bookmaker, but that was just the way it worked out. And this would be an example of the kind of stories I was writing, though when I talk to children about this particular title, I never reveal that it's a fantasy, simply biography. Autobiography, in fact. But it was a couple years ago, and after having done 16, 17 books that were, as I say, essentially fantasy or had to do with the supernatural, I reflected back on books that I'd read as a child that taught about America based on the lives, experiences, and accomplishments of exceptional Americans. Thomas Edison, Babe Ruth, George Washington Carver. And I remember getting a lot of satisfaction reading these biographies, and also how they inadvertently told you about the America that those characters, those individuals lived in. So I thought I'd like to do one of those because I liked them as a child and wondered if I could do one. So I started searching around for a subject, and not sure exactly why it occurred to me. There were so many, it was not time to write another book on Thomas Edison or anything like that. And so I was looking for an American who'd done something exceptional, accomplished something great, maybe in some ways was ahead of their time, had a vision, and contributed something. And so I was searching sort of my memory, and I had this recollection about reading an article in Sports Illustrated about, it would be about 30 years now, 40 years ago, maybe even 50. It's hard. When you get a little bit older, you instantly take a figure and you say 10 years, and you figure out it was actually 20 years ago. But a long time ago, just when I was out of college, I was reading the Sports Illustrated magazine, and it had an article on the daredevils of Niagara Falls. And I read this article, and it was quite amusing, quite entertaining. And the most remarkable thing that I learned in reading this article was that the first person to go over Niagara Falls was a woman, and it was a 62-year-old charm school teacher. And so I thought that was remarkable, but even more remarkable than that piece of information was the realization that I'd gotten to the age of 21, 22, had what I thought was a high-quality education, and I'd never come across the name Annie Edison Taylor, who was the woman who was bold enough, driven enough, possibly crazy enough to undertake this. So I thought, well, here's a good subject. And then I thought, oh, this is going to be a big problem because I read this magazine so long ago. I'm going to have to call Time Warner. I'm going to ask if there's some way that I can search their archives. And I imagined a 2-month effort just to try to remember the name, and then get some of that research and then do further research of my own. And then it occurred to me I could sit down on the computer and I could write Barrel Woman Niagara Falls. And bang, there it was. And I was relieved to find that there weren't thousands of entries, and none of these entries described a book that was in publication that described Annie's effort. And there was certainly no picture book for kids, for a couple of reasons. It's a story whose arc does not fit into the conventional sort of narrative that children's book authors often use, and that arc, that narrative, is sympathetic character, undertakes a daunting challenge, overcomes all obstacles, accomplishes it, is triumphant, and is ultimately rewarded. That was not Annie's story. And at that point, I felt a little daunted by it, and I wondered maybe it's not suitable. Her story was not suitable for a children's book. But then I thought about it a little more, and I said, well, it does not follow a conventional pattern, and that's always appealed to me as a storyteller. So I said, I don't care if it doesn't have a happy ending. I'm going to tell it anyway. So the story that I told is the story of Annie Edison Taylor. And if we could start with the images. Oh, I have it here, right here. All right, so this is the jacket for the book, and pretty much says it all, Queen of the Falls. The idea here is that you see the Queen of the Falls and immediately imagine what might be in that barrel. And some of the challenges for me as an illustrator, many people have heard of the falls. None of them have been, few have been there. I mean, given the large audience I expected would encounter the book. And so I did a fairly simple illustrative technique here. You might remember it from images past. When someone was always trying to show scale of something, they would put a pack of Marlboro cigarettes in the picture, or maybe a quarter, so you could tell how big something was. So the falls is the drop on the Canadian Horseshoe side is 170 feet, so that's a 17-story building. So I thought, well, that would be a good way to illustrate how big it is. I'll just stick a 17-story building in there. So that provides the first image, and what I'm trying to do is establish for my readers just how immense a thing this is. And the story actually starts out with the attempt itself. And all I describe here is the large crowd that's collected at the base of the falls watching this barrel go over, but I do not reveal at this point in the narrative what's in the barrel. And here you can see the crowd that's gathered around, looking with concern at the barrel as it bobs around in the cauldron at the base of the falls. And then I jump back and rewind the story a little bit back to Bay City, Michigan. And that was the place where Annie Taylor ended up. She was an unusual person, and maybe more unusual since she was a woman, because she led a very independent life. She was widowed. She married a man when she was about 21, 22, who immediately went off to the Civil War and died on the battlefield. She was left a widow. She never remarried. But she was very peripatetic, very independent. She traveled all around the United States. And what she did when she got to different cities was set up little charm schools. So the rubes in the hinterlands, who felt inferior to the sophisticates of the Northeast and the coast, could learn how to do ballroom dancing. They could learn how to use a handkerchief. They could learn how to use the fork correctly, or the correct fork. And so that was Annie's gig. She went from town to town doing this, and she ended up in Bay City. And she was quite successful initially. She had a good crowd of young children, because the parents of Bay City, Michigan wanted their children to have the polished manners of the East Coast children. But at some point, I guess they got over their inferiority complex, because she had fewer and fewer and fewer students until she had a final student left. And she was in a jam, because all through these travels that she'd had, these business adventures that she'd established from town to town, she had not saved much money. So she needed a plan. And this is something that she's been at pains to describe, and it was how she got the idea. And back in 1901, there was actually a large exposition in Buffalo. And as a result of that, many people were taking the little trip from Buffalo up to Niagara. She read in the Bay City Bugle about these giant crowds that were up there. And she had this epiphany. She said, well, if there's a lot of people staring at the Niagara Falls, what would be something that would really be the most compelling, the most extraordinary thing they could witness? And she said, if someone climbed in a barrel and went over. And she decided that would be her. And she'd had no experience in barrel making, or daredevilry, for that matter. But she, the next day, because she was seized by this idea, it became like for many innovators or inventors, once the idea strikes, it takes hold. And so the very next morning, she took a drawing of her own barrel design that would fit her. She took it to the cooper, the barrel maker, who was mostly interested or experienced in making barrels for pickles and beer. He asked her, what's this barrel for? I've never seen one quite this proportion and size. And she also, like innovators, unself-conscious about their bold ideas, said, well, I'm going over the falls in this barrel. And so he threw her out, because he said, if you want to kill yourself, you're going to have to do it without my help. But she was persistent. She believed that she had a barrel design that would get her over the falls. And so he finally relented. She returned 3 times. And the 3rd time he said, okay. And so he put his 3 best men on the job. And this is what Annie intuited at the very beginning, is that it wasn't the strength of the barrel that was important. She knew she could make a strong barrel with the aid of these coopers. What she understood is that, you can have a strong container, but like putting an egg in a strong can, you can drop the can from the counter, and the can can drop unharmed, but when you open up the can, you see something else. So this is another sort of illustrative trick to, to illustrate what Annie's concerns were. The can can turn out fine, but the egg does not. So Annie knew that she had to get a box that was proportioned correctly, or a barrel. She had to have the correct padding. She had to have the right straps. She had to have the handles. And so she really designed this barrel with the intention of coming over that falls and living. The thing that she was principally concerned about was getting trapped behind the curtain of the falls and not having enough air to survive the effort to withdraw the barrel from behind the falls, if she was unlucky enough for that to happen. Because the barrel, needing to be watertight, also needed to be airtight. Anyway, she knew, because this undertaking, am I in big trouble running over, Saul? I am. Okay, hyperspeed. She knew, because she intended to do this not simply for the glory, she was out of money. She did this because she thought, having accomplished it, that she would be able to exploit it, that she'd be able to go out on the lecture circuit, that people would pay big money. Back then they didn't have movie theaters, but they'd have lecture circuits where people would come, like me, sit here and talk to people like you, and that was the entertainment. So she anticipated post-success that she would be able to go out to the lecture circuit, make big money, she'd be set for the rest of her life, but she knew she needed a manager. In this case, it was a fellow named Frank Russell, who was previously a carnival barker. But he went ahead to the falls, and he set the stage for her arrival, and he got all these newspaper reporters and all the papers in Niagara and Buffalo excited about the arrival of this extraordinary daredevil. Now, Annie made a calculated, I think, mistake. She was 62, but she thought people would be more interested in a younger and more vigorous, vital daredevil, so she billed herself as a 42-year-old. And she also kind of overstated her past, in which she claimed to, on a regular basis, swim across frozen lakes, climb mountains. So this was the story that Frank Russell had sold to the newspapers. When she arrived in Niagara, they were surprised to see somebody who looked like their grandma climb off the train. And they thought, it's a scam. She's not really going over. They'll just, stage something at the top of the falls. They'll send an empty barrel over, and she will magically appear at the bottom, pretending, with moistened clothes to have endured this. So they put the barrel on display in a big hotel in Niagara. And the day approached, and people gathered upstream to wish Annie good luck. And she was taken out to a little island slightly upstream from the falls so that she could get the exact placement, because if she went over in the wrong part of the falls, she was definitely dead meat. So here she is, packed into the barrel, saying goodbye to the 2 trusty boatmen who put her into the water. Rowed her out, got her into the current, cut the rope. So long, Annie. And so she was pummeled badly going over here. And as bad as that time in the rapids was, she knew that the worst was yet to come, because the rivermen had said, when you hit quiet water, that's your warning. You will have about 5 seconds of quiet water just before you go over the precipice. So she gets pounded in the rapids, and she finally gets to the precipice. And they'd warned her, grab the handles and say your prayers. And she said, and oh Lord, she whispered, and then she was gone. That was about as long a prayer as she had time for. So the crowds gathered below. They see this barrel. They cannot believe that there's someone in there, though they're persuaded at this point that there is a passenger. They pull her out. She's not badly injured. Some wounds to her head, banged up, a little freaked out. And then they instantly hit the road. Frank Russell takes her out. And here's the problem that happened with Annie, is that people were expecting to see this 42-year-old, robust, vigorous, attractive person, and they got to the theater and they saw someone who looked like their grandma. And so her effort to exploit it did not go well. She got further and further down on sort of the feeding chain of entertainment opportunities. She ended up going on to a carnival circuit. She had a couple of managers, both of whom stole her barrel. She had another barrel made, and she set herself up at the edge of the falls selling souvenirs. And of course, she would bill herself as the queen of the falls, and some people believed her, some didn't, but this was actually how she finally ended up exploiting her extraordinary achievement. So at this point in the story, I knew that there had to be a kind of redemption and an effort to find meaning in it. So at the 10-year anniversary of her successful ride, a newspaper reporter actually came and saw her. I've made up a little bit of the conversation, but a lot of it is exactly as Annie spoke the words. On that 10th anniversary, he came to her and asked her about her feelings about the effort that she made. She said, you know, it didn't turn out the way I thought. I could not cash in the way I expected. It was, in that sense, a distinct failure. But then I had her, and this is the final image, I had her stroll away from the newspaper reporter and stand at the falls, and this is what she said. She turned back to the reporter. That's what everyone wonders when they see Niagara, she went on. How close will their courage let them get to it? Well, sir, you can't get any closer than I got. You ask any person who stood here looking out at those falls what they thought of someone going over them in a barrel. Why, every last one would agree it was the greatest feat ever performed. And I am content when I can say, I am the one who did it. So this is the meaning that I extracted from this, which was that even though Annie had a plan, even though in many respects the hard part she succeeded at, which is going over the falls and crawling out of the barrel, the other part was much more difficult than she anticipated. And what she got finally, which is what all people, I think, who undertake some sort of brave, bold act, you cannot anticipate the reaction and response of your audience and the glory that will come. The only thing that you can truly bank on is knowing that you had the courage to undertake it, and that at the end, that's what you'll take home, your own personal achievement. You may get some money and glory. You may stand on a stage in Stockholm someday, but the only thing you can bank on is being able to say, and I am content when I can say I am the one who did it. So that's the story of Annie.